Imagine you are standing in your kitchen and you have just caught your partner, or maybe a really close friend, in a verifiable, completely undeniable lie.
Right, like you have the text messages right there.
Exactly. You literally have the receipts on your phone,
Mm-hmm.
and you present this information calmly. You aren't yelling, you aren't throwing things. You just want an explanation.
You just want to figure out what happened.
Right. But somehow, like 10 minutes later, the script is completely flipped. You are the one crying. You're the one apologizing.
And the person who lied to you is now sitting on the couch being comforted by you.
Yes. Because bringing up their lie apparently triggered their deep historical trauma. And you just walk away feeling completely disoriented, asking yourself, like, how on earth did this just happen?
It is a very specific, honestly terrifying kind of emotional whiplash. You enter that dynamic just wanting clarity or just wanting to hold a basic boundary.
Right, a normal boundary.
Yeah, and you exit feeling like your own reality has been methodically dismantled. And the most disorienting part for the human brain is that the person doing the dismantling doesn't look like a monster.
They don't seem like the bad guy.
No, they look entirely helpless. I mean, they look like a victim.
And that is exactly why this dynamic is so universally misunderstood. We are so heavily conditioned by society and by media to spot the loud, arrogant, look-at-me narcissist.
The one who demands the center of attention.
Right. If someone brags aggressively or if they dominate a boardroom with sheer intimidation, our nervous systems immediately flag them as a threat. We know how to deal with the person wearing the crown.
We can see them coming from a mile away.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But there is a hidden, far more insidious variant operating in the shadows of our relationships. A type of pathology that doesn't wear a crown. It wears bandage.
And because it operates entirely under the radar, draped in fragility, it goes undetected for years, sometimes decades.
Which is just terrifying.
It is. It causes profound, lingering psychological damage to the people caught in its orbit, primarily because the victims usually have no idea they are actually being abused until their own mental health just completely collapses.
So today's deep dive is a psychological excavation into covert narcissism, emotional manipulation, and really the darker architecture of human behavior.
We are diving deep today.
We really are. We are taking a massive stack of clinical research, developmental trauma studies, psychoanalytic theory, and modern behavioral neuroscience to uncover the hidden truths about toxic relationships.
We aren't just going to sit here and list bad behaviors.
No, we are going to look under the hood. We want to figure out what is actually happening to you in these dynamics, and more importantly, the exact psychological mechanics of why it's happening.
We're taking a clinical documentary-style approach today, but it will absolutely be grounded in deep empathy for the lived experience of this pathology.
For everyone involved.
Exactly, both for the victim and, frankly, for the tragic reality of the narcissist. We will explore the unconscious psychological mechanisms driving them.
The why behind the mask.
Right. We want to understand that mask of fragility, looking at the developmental trauma, the specific neuroscience of trauma bonding, and the profound, agonizing shame that powers this whole complex behavioral system.
But to truly understand how this manipulation works behind closed doors, we first have to recognize that this isn't just an interpersonal issue. Like, we are actually seeing the exact same psychological machinery playing out on a massive societal scale right now.
Oh, absolutely. It's everywhere.
Yeah. In our sources, there is this fascinating discussion between cognitive scientist Scott Barry Kaufman and neuroscientist Sam Harris regarding what they term the victimhood pandemic.
It's a vital piece of context. I mean, Kaufman and Harris are describing a rapidly growing sociological phenomenon where individuals and even entire groups actively compete for moral status through claims of victimhood.
Right, which is a huge shift.
A massive shift. Historically, across most cultures, victimhood was viewed as a temporary state. It was something a person tried to overcome, heal from, or move past.
But now...
But in our modern cultural paradigm, victim status is deeply coveted. And why? Because it yields tangible psychological benefits, specialized attention, and most importantly, an unassailable moral high ground.
And I want to pause here and be incredibly clear, especially given the hyperpolarized world we navigate every day. We're explicitly noting that this phenomenon appears across the entire political spectrum.
It is not isolated to one side.
Not at all. You see this exact psychology in right-wing groups who claim victimization by powerful, shadowy entities or changing cultural demographics, just as much as you see it in left-wing circles that valorize victimhood through highly specific frameworks of identity politics.
And we really need to emphasize this for the listener.
Yes, we are absolutely not endorsing or taking sides on any of these political views. We are impartially reporting the psychological phenomenon observed in the clinical data.
Which is that adopting a victim status provides a highly effective mechanism for commanding attention, extracting resources, and insulating oneself from criticism.
Because if you criticize a victim...
Exactly. When someone claims the ultimate victim status, they essentially immunize themselves against accountability. If you criticize a self-proclaimed victim, you are automatically framed as an oppressor.
Wow. That's a perfect shield.
It is. And if we connect this macro-societal trend to the micro-level pathology we are exploring today, it perfectly mirrors the covert narcissist's playbook.
So what Kaufman and Harris observe in culture at large
is the precise mechanism the covert narcissist uses in their living room. The role of the victim is weaponized into a tool for absolute dominance.
That is wild. So if claiming to be a victim is actually a strategy for dominance, that completely rewrites how we need to look at personality disorders. Let's unpack the broader landscape of these dark personality traits.
We should, because there's a lot of confusion out there.
Yeah, we hear the word narcissist thrown around constantly on social media, usually lumped together with psychopaths and sociopaths.
Yeah.
But clinically speaking, what are the actual distinctions?
So in behavioral science, we use a framework called the dark triad of personality traits to categorize these behaviors. It consists of Machiavellianism, psychopathy, and narcissism.
Okay, so 3 distinct pillars.
Right. They share some overlap, primarily a lack of empathy, but their core drivers are entirely different. Machiavellianism is about strategic, calculated, long-term manipulation for selfish goals.
Like a cold, calculating chess player.
Exactly. Then you have psychopathy, which is characterized by high impulsivity, thrill-seeking, and a fundamental physiological absence of empathy or remorse.
Well, they just don't have the hardware for it.
Right. And then narcissism, the third pillar, is driven by a grandiose sense of self-importance, a desperate need for admiration, and a profound sense of entitlement.
But, and this is the crucial pivot that most pop psychology misses, narcissism is not a monolith.
No, it has a structural split.
All right, there's the version we all know, and then the version that hides in plain sight.
Yes. The clinical diagnosis is narcissistic personality disorder, or NPD. But within that diagnosis, there is grandiose, often called overt narcissism.
This is the stereotype.
This is the absolute stereotype. The extroverted, bold, attention-seeking individual who demands the spotlight, brags effortlessly, and becomes openly aggressive or dismissive when challenged.
But then there is vulnerable or covert narcissism.
Yes. And here is the thing. These individuals meet the exact same clinical diagnostic criteria for NPD. They have the same entitlement, the same lack of empathy, but their presentation is totally inverted.
How so?
They are often shy, introverted, highly neurotic, and hypersensitive to any perceived slight. They meticulously hide their superiority complex behind a veneer of self-deprecation.
Okay, so if we think about this visually, if the overt narcissist is like a lion roaring for dominance, making absolutely sure every animal in the savannah knows they are the undisputed king.
I love that analogy.
Thanks. Then the covert narcissist is a chameleon. They blend into the background, appearing totally harmless, maybe even fragile or injured. But they are quietly, methodically draining the resources, the empathy, and the energy of everything around them.
That is a perfect visualization of the differing strategies. The overt narcissist extracts their required narcissistic supply.
Wait, narcissistic supply, that's like their fuel.
Yes, that's the clinical term for the attention, validation, and control they need to survive. The overt extracts that supply through intimidation, charm, and awe.
The lion roaring.
Exactly. The chameleon, the covert narcissist, extracts that exact same supply through sympathy, guilt, and obligation.
Which opens up a massive curiosity gap. Like if they have the exact same underlying disorder, if their brains are theoretically wired with the same pathology, why do covert narcissists act so radically different?
It's a great question.
I mean, why choose the chameleon route when they could just be the lion?
It all comes down to how their specific psychological defense mechanisms justify their shared core of entitlement.
Okay, break that down for me.
Well, both the grandiose and the vulnerable narcissist share an obsessive self-focus and a profound inability to genuinely care about the internal emotional world of others. What differs is the internal narrative they use to explain why they deserve special treatment.
So they tell themselves a different story. Let's look at that narrative. How does the overt narcissist justify it?
The grandiose narcissist feels entitled to special treatment, to break the rules, to ignore your feelings, because they genuinely believe they are superior.
They literally think they are better than everyone else.
They look in the mirror and, consciously at least, they see a god. Their internal monologue is, I deserve the best because I am the best. I am smarter, more attractive, more capable than the peasants around me.
Okay, so the covert narcissist clearly isn't walking around thinking they are God because they are constantly complaining about how terrible their life is.
Precisely. The vulnerable narcissist feels entitled to special treatment because they believe they have suffered more than anyone else.
Ah, so it's a competition of pain.
Yes. Their internal narrative is, I deserve the best, I deserve all of your attention, and I deserve to be excused from normal responsibilities because life has been so uniquely unfair to me.
My pain is deeper than your pain.
Exactly.
Uh-huh.
I am a tragic, misunderstood genius, and the world owes me a debt.
That is fascinating.
Yeah.
It's like a hidden superiority complex. They use their suffering to demand that the world bend to their will.
It really is a form of dominance.
And it's incredibly confusing to experience because they might actually seem humble at first glance. Our sources point out that covert narcissists are absolute masters of the backhanded compliment or acting incredibly self-deprecating.
Oh, they are masters at it.
Okay.
But it is a highly engineered performance of modesty, and it is entirely transactional.
Transactional how?
They will minimize their own accomplishments, not out of genuine humility, but to force you, the listener, to step in and inflate them.
Oh, so it's a trap.
It's a total trap. They will say, oh, my presentation today was terrible. I'm just so incompetent. But here's the trick. They don't actually believe they are incompetent.
They are fishing.
Yes. They want you to immediately rush in and say, no, it was brilliant. You're amazing. Everyone loved it. You are required to constantly prop up their fragile ego.
And what happens if you agree with them? Like, what if you say, yeah, you did seem a little off today during the presentation?
Oh, if you agree with their self-deprecation, they will instantly turn on you with profound resentment and anger.
Really? Because you agreed with what they literally just said?
Because you failed to play your assigned role in the script. You didn't provide the narcissistic supply they were fishing for.
That is so manipulative. I really want you, the listener, to pause and reflect on this pattern. Think about that friend or family member or partner who is constantly fatalistic.
The one who is always a victim.
Right. The person where nothing is ever good enough. You spend 3 hours on the phone trying to help them, offering solutions to their problems, giving them emotional support, and they just systematically shoot down every single idea.
Because they don't want a solution.
Exactly. They want to marinate in the grievance.
Yeah.
And you hang up the phone, completely exhausted, and you end up walking on eggshells around them, terrified of saying the wrong thing and triggering another emotional collapse.
That physiological feeling you get, that exhaustion, that sensation of walking on eggshells, is your nervous system accurately registering that you are in the presence of an emotional predator.
Even if that predator is weeping on your couch.
Even then, the covert narcissist's suffering is weaponized. If they successfully position themselves as the ultimate victim, then by default, anyone who opposes them, questions them, or simply fails to prioritize them 24/7
is cast in the role of the abuser.
Exactly.
Which brings us to a really dark but necessary place. Where does this architecture of manipulation actually come from? We're moving from the behavioral symptoms, the complaining, the subtle guilt trips, to the root cause.
We have to look at the origins.
Right. If we look at the trauma research, we are really diving into the psychology of toxic shame, aren't we?
To understand the genesis of covert narcissism, we absolutely have to look deep into developmental psychology. Specifically, we rely on the psychoanalytic perspectives of pioneers like Heinz Kohut and Otto Kernberg, and we blend their foundational insights with modern schema therapy.
Okay, so this goes way back to childhood.
It does. When we talk about covert narcissism, we are not just talking about bad behavior or a difficult personality quirk. Clinically speaking, we are looking at a profound developmental arrest.
An arrest meaning their emotional development essentially froze at a very young age.
Yes. This pathology almost always stems from early childhood environments characterized by severe emotional neglect, abuse, or profound parental invalidation.
What does that look like day to day for a kid?
We're talking about a cold, rejecting home environment mixed with a failure to what Heinz Kohut called mirror the child's emotional needs.
Can we break down that concept of mirroring?
Yeah.
Because I think that's crucial. What does that actually look like for a child?
Sure. Imagine a toddler who has just drawn a messy picture with crayons. They run up to their parent, beaming with pride, and show them the drawing. A healthy parent mirrors that emotion.
They match the energy.
Right. They smile, they validate the child's joy, they say, wow, look at those colors, I love it. The child's internal experience of themselves as good, capable, and worthy of love is validated by the external world.
Which builds self-esteem.
Exactly. Now, imagine a narcissistic or deeply neglectful parent in that exact scenario. The child runs up with the drawing, the parent ignores them or coldly dismisses them, or perhaps mocks the drawing for being messy.
Oh, wow. So the child's emotion is completely invalidated. The joy hits a brick wall.
It hits a brick wall, and when this happens chronically, day after day, year after year, the child fails to develop a realistic, integrated sense of self-esteem.
They never get that foundational belief that they are okay.
Right. A healthy child learns that they are loved for who they are, authentic flaws and all. The child who develops narcissism learns a terrifying lesson. Their authentic, vulnerable self is fundamentally unacceptable and unlovable.
That is heartbreaking. And to survive that reality, their brain has to adapt. They realize they can't get love by just being themselves, so they have to manufacture a version of themselves that will protect them.
That is the mechanism of splitting, as Otto Kernberg described it. To survive the unbearable emotional reality of being unloved, the child's psyche literally splits.
Splits into what?
Well, schema therapy, which is a highly effective integrative psychotherapy, refers to the hidden, damaged, authentic core as the vulnerable child mode. And this core becomes completely saturated with what we call the defectiveness and shame schema.
Meaning they feel at a cellular physical level that they're fundamentally broken and toxic.
Absolutely. They internalize the neglect. A child cannot comprehend that their parent is flawed. So the child reasons, if my parent doesn't love me, it must be because I am inherently unlovable, toxic, and bad.
Okay, I have to push back here because this is the paradox that trips everyone up.
Go for it.
If they feel so unlovable, so defective, and so deeply ashamed, why in the world are they called narcissists? I mean, narcissism implies being absolutely in love with yourself. Shouldn't they just be considered severely depressed or anxious?
This is the core paradox of the entire disorder, and understanding this changes everything. The narcissism is the defense mechanism against the shame.
Right, really. The narcissism is the shield.
Yes. The grandiosity, whether it is the overt grandiosity of the lion or the covert victimhood grandiosity of the chameleon, is a desperate, heavily reinforced mask. It is an elaborate psychological fortress constructed to hide the terrified, shame-filled child inside.
So they aren't actually in love with themselves.
No, they are not in love with themselves. They are in love with the false image they have created to survive.
So the arrogance, the entitlement, the constant need for validation, it's all armor.
It is entirely armor. If they drop the mask, if they admit to a flaw, if they take accountability for a mistake, they are instantly reconnected with that defectiveness schema.
And what does that feel like to them?
To their psyche, experiencing that core shame feels like actual physical annihilation. It feels like psychic death.
That is a massive paradigm shift.
Right.
But this brings up a crucial distinction in the clinical literature between how the overt and covert narcissist manage this armor. I read about the difference between implicit shame and explicit shame.
Right, and this perfectly explains the difference in their daily moods. We differentiate between implicit shame, which operates entirely unconsciously, and explicit shame, which is consciously painfully felt.
So the overt narcissist.
Grandiose narcissists have developed a very robust, very thick false self. They are largely successful at completely suppressing their shame into the unconscious.
So they don't even feel it.
No, in clinical terms, they are egosyntonic. They are completely comfortable with their grandiose delusions. They don't actually feel the shame on a daily basis.
They just believe their own hype.
Yeah.
But the covert narcissist, their armor is thinner. It's permeable.
Exactly. The vulnerable narcissist has a highly fragile false self. Their defense mechanisms frequently fail, meaning they are constantly flooded by conscious, explicit shame. They live in a state of chronic, agonizing psychic pain.
And behavioral science gives us a brilliant framework for how humans handle this pain. The psychiatrist Donald Nathanson developed something called the compass of shame. Can we walk through how a covert narcissist navigates that compass?
Yes, absolutely. Nathanson theorized that when flooded with shame, humans typically utilize 4 coping mechanisms, arranged like points on a compass.
What are the 4 points?
Attack other, attack self, avoidance, and withdrawal. While grandiose narcissists lean heavily on attack other, they deflect shame by bullying or belittling you. Covert narcissists rely heavily on the other side of the compass.
Which is?
Attack self and withdrawal.
Which perfectly explains why they so often show up in a therapist's office presenting with what looks like standard clinical depression or severe social anxiety.
Precisely. A clinician might initially misdiagnose them, but their depression isn't just standard melancholic sadness, and it's not a simple neurochemical imbalance.
What is that?
Their depression is the structural collapse of their defensive mask.
Yeah.
It is the agonizing weight of their defectiveness schema breaking through to their conscious awareness.
So they just shut down.
They withdraw from the world, they isolate, because any social interaction carries the terrifying risk of their deep internal inadequacy being exposed.
So let's look at the interpersonal dynamic this creates. If they are terrified of direct confrontation because conflict might expose their shame and shatter their fragile mask, but they still have this massive entitlement and this desperate need to control their environment, how do they get what they want?
They can't roar like the lion.
Right. So they had to resort to indirect warfare. And that brings us to the specific tactics of plausible deniability.
Because direct dominance is too psychologically risky, the covert narcissist must employ an arsenal of covert abuse. They absolutely must maintain their image as the innocent victim, the martyr, or the good guy, while simultaneously exerting absolute emotional control over their partners, family members, or coworkers.
This is where we see the weaponization of passive aggression, like the heavy sighs, the emotional withdrawal, the silent treatment.
Let's look at how this specifically plays out in a home. The covert narcissist will create an incredibly tense atmosphere over a perceived slight.
But they won't say anything.
No, they won't yell. Instead, they will sulk. They will slam cabinet doors just a little too hard. They will sigh heavily from the other room. They will strategically forget to do an important task you asked them to do.
So they're communicating, just not with words.
They broadcast their hostility and displeasure incredibly loudly through nonverbal cues.
Yes, and then the victim, whose nervous system is now on high alert, wanting to resolve the tension, approaches them and asks, "What's wrong? Are you okay? Did I do something?"
And what does the covert narcissist say?
"Nothing. I'm fine."
That interaction right there is the pure essence of gaslighting. The narcissist's behavior is clearly communicating rage and distress, but their words explicitly deny it.
Which scrambles your brain.
It creates profound cognitive dissonance in the victim. The victim's brain is receiving two completely contradictory streams of information. Over time, the victim starts to question their own reality, their own sanity, and their own ability to read basic social cues.
They feel like they're going crazy.
Which is exactly the narcissist's goal, right? It keeps the victim off balance.
It keeps the victim hyper-focused on the narcissist's emotional state. The victim becomes a full-time detective, trying to decode the narcissist's moods to prevent the next silent treatment.
And through that, the narcissist has achieved total control of the household's emotional climate without ever having to raise their voice or take accountability for a conflict.
It's brilliantly evil. And the most maddening tactic they use to maintain that control is blame shifting. It's like a kind of psychological judo.
Oh, blame shifting is their specialty.
Let's say the covert narcissist actually does something objectively, undeniably wrong. They snap at you in front of friends, they ruin a holiday, or, going back to our kitchen scenario at the start of the deep dive, you catch them in a verifiable lie.
Right. They're dead to rights.
When you try to hold them accountable, how do they twist the narrative so brilliantly that you end up apologizing?
It is a masterclass in manipulation. You confront them about their hurtful behavior, and instead of taking accountability, which, remember, would trigger their defectiveness schema, they immediately pivot to their own fragility.
What do they say?
They will say something like, "I can't believe you are attacking me when you know how stressed I am at work right now. You always do this. You always make me feel like I'm a terrible person. Maybe I should just leave since I ruin everything I touch."
Wow. And just like that, the issue is no longer the lie they told or the holiday they ruined. The issue is now your cruelty for having the audacity to bring it up.
The spotlight has completely shifted.
You are now comforting them for the pain they caused you.
That is the exact intended outcome. By shifting into the victim role, they evade all accountability, they neutralize your anger, and they force you right back into the caretaking role.
It's an incredibly effective emotional survival strategy for them, but it is deeply, profoundly toxic for the partner.
It destroys the partner over time.
Which leads to a question that I think people on the outside of these relationships always ask, often judgmentally. Why do victims stay?
Right. Why didn't you just leave?
Yeah. If the relationship is this exhausting, this confusing, and this draining, why not just pack your bags and leave? The answer lies in the neuroscience of what clinical psychology calls intermittent reinforcement and trauma bonding.
It is crucial to understand that a toxic relationship with a covert narcissist is rarely bad 100% of the time.
Because if it was, you'd just run.
Exactly. If it were constant misery, the human survival instinct would kick in and people would leave immediately. Instead, the relationship operates on a push-pull dynamic. It alternates between phases of intense idealization and crushing devaluation.
Let's talk about that idealization phase,
Yeah.
especially at the beginning of the relationship or during what's called a hoovering phase, when they fear you might actually leave.
During idealization, the covert narcissist can be incredibly loving, attentive, and seemingly vulnerable in a beautiful, poetic way.
They show you their wounds.
They share their sob stories, their past traumas, and they make you feel like you are the only person in the world who truly understands their deep, complex soul. They mirror your desires perfectly.
They hook you by making you feel exceptionally special. They essentially crown you as their savior.
Exactly. You feel an incredibly deep emotional bond. But inevitably, because they cannot sustain intimacy, the devaluation phase begins.
The mask slips.
The passive aggression starts, the silent treatments, the withholding of affection, the subtle criticisms. The victim is plunged into anxiety, confusion, and despair, desperately trying to figure out what they did wrong to lose that beautiful connection.
And this is where the neuroscience comes in. What is happening in the victim's brain during this push-pull cycle?
It creates a highly addictive neurological cycle that is chemically identical to gambling addiction.
Like a slot machine.
Exactly like a slot machine. When you pull the lever on a slot machine, you don't win every time. If you did, you'd get bored. The unpredictable nature of the reward, the intermittent reinforcement, causes massive, erratic spikes in dopamine, the neurotransmitter associated with craving and reward.
So the victim is in the devaluation phase. They are stressed, they're crying, their body is flooded with cortisol, the stress hormone. They are at their absolute breaking point.
And right at that breaking point, the narcissist offers a glimmer of that original warmth.
Just crumb.
A deep conversation late at night, a sudden tearful apology, a moment of profound physical or emotional connection. The victim's brain registers this cessation of pain as a massive euphoric reward. The dopamine floods in, completely overriding the cortisol.
There's an unconscious hijacking of the mammalian attachment system. The brain starts to associate the abuser not just with the pain, but as the only biological source of relief from that pain.
That is the essence of a trauma bond. The victim stays out of a desperate, primal neurological craving to return to the safety of the idealization phase.
They think it's love.
They mistake the intensity of the anxiety and the extreme relief of the reconciliation for deep, complex, passionate love. They rationally believe that if they just try harder, communicate better, or love the narcissist enough, they can permanently unlock that good version of their partner.
But the tragedy is that the good version is just another manifestation of the mask. It's a tool for retention.
It's not real.
Which brings up a really confusing paradox I saw highlighted in the research, a concept they call splintered empathy. I want to explore this because it drives victims absolutely crazy.
It's one of the most jarring things to experience.
Right. How can a covert narcissist sit on the couch and weep uncontrollably over a tragic news story about an orphaned child halfway across the world, but stare blankly with cold, dead, irritated eyes when their own partner is weeping right in front of them?
It seems like a massive contradiction. How can they have empathy for a stranger, but none for their spouse? But it makes perfect clinical sense when you understand the architecture of their shame.
How so?
Narcissists are capable of demonstrating empathy, but their empathy is splintered and highly selective. They can show profound empathy for distant victims, strangers on the news, rescue animals, fictional characters in a movie, because it is entirely safe. It costs them absolutely nothing psychologically.
And it actually benefits them, doesn't it? It proves to the world and to themselves that they have moral superiority.
Precisely. We call that pro-social narcissistic supply. By weeping over the news story, they get to view themselves and be viewed by you as a deeply feeling, highly empathetic, morally righteous person. It bolsters the false self.
But showing empathy to a close partner is an entirely different psychological transaction.
Completely different.
Because it requires something they just don't have.
It requires vulnerability, genuine emotional attunement, and most importantly, accountability. If their partner is crying because of something the narcissist did, A harsh word, a lie, a betrayal, acknowledging that pain means acknowledging their own flaw.
It threatens the false self. It threatens to expose the defectiveness schema.
And as we established, that triggers unbearable shame.
So, to protect themselves from that shame, their defense mechanisms instantly shut down their capacity for empathy.
Yes, they dissociate. They stare blankly. Or worse, they become actively irritated and angry at their partner's tears, viewing them not as an expression of pain, but as a manipulation, an attack, or an unfair demand on their energy.
They get mad at you for crying.
They literally cannot afford the psychological cost of comforting you.
That is chilling.
Oh.
They are emotionally bankrupt when it comes to accountability. Okay, we've explored how they withdraw, how they manipulate from the shadows, how they use silence and victimhood as weapons. But what happens when the pressure is simply too high?
When they are pushed to the brink.
Right. What happens when their victim narrative is directly, unavoidably challenged, they are cornered, and they can't withdraw?
This takes us into the phenomenon of narcissistic rage. When the covert narcissist is cornered, when their motivated reasoning fails and their mask slips entirely, we witness what is known as the shame rage spiral.
Let's break down the unconscious mechanism here. Let's say they receive highly critical, undeniable feedback at work. Or their partner catches them in a massive, undeniable betrayal.
Like the kitchen example again.
Exactly. Their usual tactics, deflection, playing the victim, gaslighting, sulking, aren't working. The mirror is being held up, and they are forced to look.
In that exact moment, the protective barrier of the false self collapses. The motivated reasoning they use every day to convince themselves of their superiority and innocence completely fails.
And what happens to them internally?
The result is catastrophic for their psyche. Without the armor, they are instantly flooded with a tsunami of pure, unadulterated shame. They are violently reconnected with the vulnerable child mode and the defectiveness schema.
And shame at that intensity isn't just an uncomfortable emotion. Like, it feels like annihilation. It feels like utter powerlessness.
Exactly. The human mind simply cannot tolerate that level of psychic disintegration for long. It is a state of absolute psychological emergency.
So what does the brain do?
To survive, the ego performs a rapid, violent transmutation. It takes the unbearable, internal, imploding agony of shame, and it converts it into outward, explosive, externalized energy. We call this humiliated fury.
By getting angry, they regain a sense of power. They go from being the pathetic, defective, helpless child to being the powerful, righteous, terrifying judge.
Yes. The rage serves a vital dual purpose for their survival. First, it instantly distances them from the feeling of shame. Anger feels powerful, shame feels weak.
And the second purpose?
It serves to obliterate the source of the shame. The rage is directed at the person who dared to hold up the mirror, with the goal of punishing them so severely they will never dare to challenge the false self again.
And the behavioral evidence for how this rage operates is absolutely fascinating. I want to delve into a specific piece of research known as the hot sauce study, conducted by psychologists Krizan and Johar.
It's a brilliantly designed study.
It really is. It perfectly illustrates how rage manifests differently in covert versus overt narcissists, and it moves beyond just asking people how angry they get. It measures actual aggression.
They wanted to see how narcissists react to a provocation in a controlled laboratory setting and how they retaliate.
Here is the setup. The researchers brought participants in and used clinical assessments to measure their levels of both grandiose and vulnerable narcissism.
So they knew who was who.
Right. Then they subjected these participants to a non-personal provocation. Specifically, they had another supposed participant who was actually part of the study give them a highly unpleasant, bitter drink to consume.
It's important to note the nature of this provocation. It is an annoyance. It is a slight. But it is not a direct attack on their core ego, their intelligence, or their identity.
Right. It's just mildly infuriating. Then the participants were given the chance to retaliate. They were tasked with allocating the amount of incredibly spicy hot sauce that the other person would have to consume.
Hot sauce is a great metric here because it represents a tangible, scalable measurement of physical aggression.
But here's the brilliant twist the researchers added. Sometimes the participants were allocating the hot sauce to the person who gave them the bitter drink.
Oh.
And sometimes they were allocating it to a completely innocent third party who had just been mildly annoying in a different context.
The results were highly revealing regarding the fundamental nature of narcissistic rage and how vulnerability drives violence.
Okay, so get this. The grandiose narcissists did not react with heightened aggression to this provocation. They didn't pour out extra hot sauce.
Why? Because the bitter drink wasn't a direct threat to their ego. They brushed it off. They simply didn't care enough to get angry.
But the vulnerable narcissists, the coverts, they showed intense reactive aggression. They poured out massive, punitive amounts of hot sauce.
And the most shocking part of the data.
Yes, they showed extreme displaced aggression. They didn't just target the provocateur. They displaced their rage and aggressively punished the completely innocent third party.
What is so vital about this data is how clearly it maps onto the lived experience of being in a family or a relationship with a covert narcissist. The study proves that their rage is pervasive, undiscriminating, and fueled by a baseline of hostile mistrust.
They are just waiting to blow up.
They are walking around with a full reservoir of shame, just waiting for an excuse to vent it.
If we connect this laboratory data to the listener's actual life, this perfectly explains the kicking the dog phenomenon.
Exactly.
This is why a covert narcissist will have a mildly bad day at work. Maybe they feel slightly humiliated or overlooked by a boss in a meeting. They can't yell at the boss.
It's too risky.
So they come home, simmering with activated shame, and they unleash a disproportionate, devastating verbal attack on their spouse or their children over a completely minor annoyance, like the dishes being loaded wrong in the dishwasher.
Precisely. The spouse didn't cause the shame. The children didn't cause the humiliation. But the spouse and the children are safe targets for the displaced aggression.
It's just so unfair.
The narcissist is essentially vomiting their internal, intolerable shame onto you. They need you to feel as small, as defective, as confused, and as humiliated as they feel internally. If they can make you cry, they regain their sense of superiority.
It is a desperately dysfunctional, highly abusive, emotional regulation strategy.
It is.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener? We need to have a reality check here. We've talked about the mechanisms, but we need to talk about the impact.
You can't ignore the fallout.
If you are listening to this deep dive and nodding along, if you are constantly exhausted, if you're walking on eggshells in your own home, if your nervous system is constantly in fight or flight mode, if you feel chronic, lingering guilt for another adult's unhappiness, you are likely entangled with a vulnerable narcissist.
And it is absolutely vital to recognize the profound psychological and physiological toll this takes.
It physically damages you.
It does. Victims of prolonged, covert narcissistic abuse rarely emerge unscathed. They often suffer from severe anxiety, complex PTSD, depression, somatic illnesses like autoimmune flare-ups from chronic cortisol exposure.
Just from the constant stress.
Yes, and a complete systemic erosion of their own self-esteem and reality testing.
And a question we have to answer is, why does this pattern repeat? Why do incredibly smart, highly capable, deeply empathetic people get stuck in these destructive loops for years, sometimes decades?
It happens precisely because the victim is empathetic.
Explain that.
Victims of covert narcissists often have a caretaker personality structure, or they are highly attuned to the emotions of others. They fundamentally misinterpret the dynamic.
How do they misinterpret it?
Because the covert narcissist wears their fragility on their sleeve, the empathetic partner sees the narcissist suffering. They see the vulnerable child crying out, and they believe with every fiber of their being that with enough love, enough patience, enough understanding, and enough sacrifice, they can heal that child.
They believe they can love the narcissist out of their pain.
It's the ultimate savior complex. But you can't, can you? Your love can't fix them.
No. It is a tragic, devastating trap. You're trying to fill a bucket with a massive hole in the bottom.
Right. It just all leaks out.
Your love, no matter how profound, how consistent, or how unconditional, cannot fix their deeply entrenched defectiveness schema.
Every time you try to pour love and validation in, their defense mechanisms filter it out, or they demand more, or paradoxically, they resent you for seeing them as broken in the first place.
And in the process,
you end up entirely depleting your own life force, your own sanity, trying to sustain a psychic structure that is fundamentally structurally broken.
This brings us to the hardest, most frequently asked question in the realm of personality disorders. Can the narcissist change? Is there any actual hope for treatment, or is it a lost cause?
The clinical truth is difficult to hear, but necessary. Narcissistic personality disorder, in all its forms, is notoriously highly resistant to treatment.
Why is this so hard to treat?
The very nature of the disorder, the absolute refusal to take accountability, the core belief that the problem is always external, the intense, violent avoidance of shame prevents the patient from engaging in the necessary therapeutic work.
They just won't do it.
They often quit therapy the exact moment the therapist gently challenges their victim narrative or points out their abusive behavior. They will claim the therapist is biased or incompetent and walk out.
But there's a glimmer of hope in the literature,
Yes.
right? Specifically with schema therapy.
Yes. If, and it is a massive monumental if, a covert narcissist is willing to acknowledge their dysfunction and commit to long-term intensive therapy, meaningful progress is possible.
And schema therapy is the way to go.
Schema therapy is currently considered the most promising modality. But the goal is not just symptom management or learning better communication skills. The goal is complete structural change of the personality.
So how does the therapist do that?
The therapist has to help the patient slowly bypass their rigid, aggressive coping modes, slowly build psychological tolerance for experiencing shame without acting out, and then directly reparent that terrified, vulnerable child mode.
They essentially have to build a healthy adult mode from scratch because they never developed one.
Exactly. They must construct an internal, healthy adult that can hold the vulnerable child with compassion while simultaneously holding the self strictly accountable for how their coping mechanisms harm others.
That sounds incredibly difficult.
It takes years of grueling, painful, consistent psychological work. It is essentially reconstructing a personality that was arrested in early childhood. It is possible, but it is rare.
So while we can hold out clinical hope for breakthroughs, what about the listener? What actionable strategies can someone use right now, today, to protect themselves if they're dealing with a covert narcissist? Whether it's a boss, a parent, or a partner, how do you survive the chameleon?
First and foremost, you must maintain a realistic view. This is called radical acceptance. You must radically accept who this person is today based on their consistent behavior.
Not their potential.
Not who you hope they will be, not who they were during the idealization phase, and not their potential. Stop hoping for sudden empathy or a sudden tearful realization of the pain they've caused you.
Because it's just not coming.
It is not coming. You must grieve the relationship you wish you had and accept the reality of the one you're actually in.
Right. Radical acceptance cuts off the false hope that keeps you hooked. What about dealing with the day-to-day manipulation, like the sighing, the silent treatments?
Number 2, guard against passive aggression by refusing to participate in the script. Identify the pattern and do not take the bait.
So when they do it,
when they sigh heavily, slam a door, or give you the silent treatment, do not rush in to fix it. Do not ask what's wrong 50 times. Do not play the detective. Let them sit in their own manufactured tension.
Which leads right into number 3. Set boundaries without guilt. And boundaries are often misunderstood, I think.
Yes. A boundary is not about controlling the narcissist's behavior. It is about controlling your own response to their behavior. You must accept the discomfort of their sulking.
How do you phrase that boundary?
You state it calmly. If you are going to give me the silent treatment, I'm going to go to the other room and read a book, or I'm going to leave the house and see a friend.
And then you just do it.
And then you must follow through, regardless of how much of a victim they claim to be in a response. You stop rewarding the dysfunction.
And finally, number 4, which ties back to Scott Barry Kaufman's sociological work, focus on building an empowerment mindset.
This is critical for long-term healing. Covert narcissists drain your self-esteem by making your entire worth contingent on their mood and their approval.
So you have to reclaim that.
An empowerment mindset means aggressively rebuilding your own identity. You must base your self-esteem on your own real achievements, your own core values, and healthy reciprocal connections with people who actually care about your feelings.
You take the focus off of them.
You must decenter the narcissist from your life's narrative and recenter your own purpose. Your worth as a human being is not determined by your ability to fix toxic people.
We have covered incredible ground in this deep dive today. We started by looking at the macro-level societal illusion of the victimhood pandemic, and how our culture is increasingly rewarding the exact manipulative behaviors that cause so much private, behind-closed-doors destruction.
It's all connected.
It really is. We journey deep into the tragic, shame-filled core of the covert narcissist. Looking at the wounded child trapped beneath the passive-aggressive armor, we uncovered the clinical mechanics of gaslighting, the profound neurological trap of trauma bonding, and the terrifying reality of the shame-rage spiral and displaced aggression.
We've mapped the architecture of a very dark, very hidden psychological prison. It is a prison for the narcissist, who is forever trapped running from their own shame, and it is a prison for the victim, who is trapped in the narcissist's distorted, funhouse mirror reality.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener? If you recognized your own life in these examples, I want you to hear this clearly. You are not crazy.
You are absolutely not crazy.
The profound confusion, the exhaustion, the chronic lingering guilt you feel, these are not signs that you are a bad partner or that you are failing. They are the exact intended results of the covert narcissist psychological machinery.
You are reacting completely normally to a highly abnormal, deeply manipulative, and entirely crazy-making dynamic.
Understanding the clinical reality of this disorder, seeing the machinery for what it is the first and most important step toward emancipating yourself from its effects. Once you see the strings, they can no longer control you in the same way. I want to leave you with a final provocative thought, something to mull over that builds on everything we've explored today. We spend so much of our lives terrified of the monsters who confidently roar, the overt abusers, the aggressive rule breakers, the people who proudly and loudly announce their toxicity. We build massive walls to keep them out.
But perhaps we should spend more time reflecting on how our society and our own empathetic blind spots actively reward and incentivize the quiet weaponization of victimhood.
Exactly. If victimhood is becoming the new currency of power, if we grant unquestioned authority and endless patience to whoever claims to be the most wounded, are we inadvertently training a whole new generation to view their own suffering not as something to heal, but as something to exploit?
It's a scary thought.
Have we created an environment where the chameleon is actually far more dangerous than the lion, simply because we refuse to see the teeth? Think about the last time you apologized for something you didn't do just to keep the peace. The next time you find yourself in that kitchen feeling that emotional whiplash, stop, take a breath, recognize the dynamic for what it is, and refuse to play the game. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.